Hello guys, welcome to my channel. Before I start this video, please like and subscribe my channel for more awesome content, and do support and watch till end. Let's start this video. Focused, burgundy shaded eyes scan the massive lair, hidden underneath the facade of an old abandoned church. In front of him, the hooded figures of stray magicians were being led away by a group of fallen angels, hands cuffed by a light-imbued handcuff. On this floor lay several black blemishes, as if there were several blasts of mini-explosions. If not for the faint yet distinct essence of what Azazel would describe as fallen angelish they had left, he would never guess those piles of ashes used to be his lackeys. What are your thoughts about this? A gruff-looking man with muscular body stepped up to his left, being a head taller than him. His voice held the respect of a seasoned warrior, and Barakiel himself had seen his fair share of battles. Hands buried in his coat, Azazel turned to look at his rigid vice-governor. Well, those bunches said they were under Rainer's order, weren't they? Barakiel's perpetual frowning face frowned even more somehow. You trust them? What if the devils attack this place without reason? Nothing's without reason, Barakiel. He chuckled. The Grimoire isn't as vile as you like to think she is. Crafty, though. Rainer's group happened to take away a girl they have been eyeing. You mean she has the sacred gear? Azazel said in a way that he sounded disappointed, like a scientist losing a research resource. But what they did was their business. Rainer and her little band of misfits violated their border first. I'll write a formal apology tomorrow, so let's call it a day. Barakiel's unsmiling look turned even rougher. He looked as if he was always mad when he wasn't, but now, he was mad. Are we overlooking that they incinerated a dozen of our own? And more, possibly? In usual cases, we don't. Azazel replied, casually. But this isn't a normal case. Rainer's under Cocabiel. You know how the guy has a massive boner for the word aggression. He's been missing for quite a while too. Might as well label him rogue now before further damage. The co-founder of the Grigori paused. Are you suspecting this is his doing? He's a devious man. With a light chuckle, Azazel trotted away from the scene. Come on, stop questioning everything and accompany me for a while. There's this small shack I've wanted to revisit. A shack? The sack there is amazing. Barakiel turned his body around, but not yet following his compatriot's steps. You didn't come here just to have an excuse to drink, right? What are you talking about? Being a detective is hard work. A hard-working man deserves a drink or two. Shaking his head reproachfully, Barakiel sighed, but trailed after the governor later on. After all, he couldn't resist the temptation. Otherwise, he'd be an angel. Lucifer prided himself for this first day as Lucifer and not some random person unimportant to the history of mankind. It wasn't due to the fact he nearly got his girl back the same day she ditched him. Theoretically, Rainer killed him before saying they officially broke up. But he supposed lodging a buzzing light spear into his gut could be considered as a method of breaking up. A fatal one at that, and more of an ultimatum than a simple statement. Anyway, no. Not because of that. He prided himself for getting invited inside a girl's bedroom in barely under an hour, and a delicious bombshell of a girl not to mention, as he had expected from a royalty, devils or not. Her bedroom was cozy and roomier than a normal teenager's, and the air conditioner was already set to run, whirring almost without a noise. Calming white paint coated the walls, baby pink on the accent wall, furniture decorated the room nicely without being over the top, and a fuzzy rug all over the floor. It even had a shower room installed, which, at the moment, was being used by said owner of the room. Pity she refused him joining her. Shame. Think of all the water they could save. But apart from the room size and the luxuries, It was a surprisingly normal room for a princess, except for those weird things stored inside a cabinet. Mask, ceramics, pottery, paper scrolls, statues, weird-looking trinkets, colored hand fans, and even an ancient coin that had a square hole in the middle, and many other knickknacks neatly arranged on a display, each had their own stand. He recalled seeing some of those items at a History Channel, but Lucifer guessed these were the plunders of her devil job. He still found it odd for these things to be stored in her room regardless. Whatever. It was her hobby. Beelzebub's hobby was studying flies and diseases, and it only bothered Lucifer once. Putting that thought aside, Lucifer passed by a standing mirror and admired the dashing reflection for a bit. He wasn't called by those prim angels in heaven as the embodiment of pride without a reason, and not without a look to back it up. Eventually sitting down on the king-sized bed, Lucifer took a moment to take another look around. Even this bed didn't take up half of the room. 3-4 girls could sleep here comfortably, and that was without counting the fuzzy floor as a makeshift bed. Waiting for Rias from her beauty shower, the first devil lied down and spread his hands, feeling the unbelievably soft bedspread. He had already ditched his suit at the coat hanger, black belt peeled off and shoes left near the door. Only his unbuttoned white shirt and black trousers were on him. He didn't really need sleep. Well, he did, just not at the moment. He didn't need drink or food to live, or even sex to fulfill his desires, but what was to harm him if he did? Boredom was more harmful than consuming food or a person. He loved fun activities. Hearing the door clicking was like a dinner call. Lucifer tucked his chin to see, across his chest, before sitting up as Rias walked out from the steaming room. He could smell a sweet fruity fragrance filling the room, feeling the slight heat from the bathroom as steam rolled over, taking in her well-developed figure that was hidden only by a piece of white fabric. Wet crimson hair pleated lasciviously to her unmarred pearly skin that was rosy from the hot shower. With a generous smile, Lucifer greeted the stunning young lady as he shook his head in a playful manner. My, aren't we all especially gorgeous tonight? Unbothered by the fact there was only a fabric and air separating him from her body, she walked towards him. You're quite full of yourself, aren't you, Lucifer? Indeed, I am. Can't seem to get enough of you, however. She felt her cheeks starting to heat up a little as she sat beside him. No few tried to cajole her, devils or humans, and nobody ever succeeded. It surprised her that she took note of his flirtation. Perhaps due to his cleverly woven words, Rias knew it was all said to get her to drop her towel. Thanks. Rias muttered, regaining herself. She paid no mind as he glanced at the line on her chest that the towel failed to cover, and even did a little shoulder shake to accidentally slide the towel down, showing more of her naked skin. Taking another look from her hair to her toes as if he was only checking her out, Lucifer read her like an open book. Princess, charmed as I am, I'm not pressuring you in doing this without your full consent. At that, Rias turned her head. She saw his teasing smile, and eyed him, wonderingly. That was not the reaction she expected. At least not one she expected from her little scheme. What do you mean? You see, as much as I love to bed a stunning lady like you, I'd rather do the deed only if you're willing as well as I do. Why? Because he wasn't some pathetic human who'd jump on her if given the chance. He knew what humans would do, and they disgust him. A devil like him had more class. Rias swallowed a lump in her throat. But, I do. I'm only a little nervous, that's all. Oh, stop lying to yourself. Lucifer snickered. Look at your hands. Your face, your lips, your toes, your gorgeous eyes. I noticed they're greens with a bluish tint. Very mesmerizing. But I rambled off. You're shaking all over, princess, and I'm guessing that's not the cold air making you shiver, and neither does excitement. Believe me, I know. Rias did not expect this randy man to be this considerate. Inside the shower room, she was busy steeling herself for whatever he was going to do to her body the moment she walked out the door, even if he ravished her like a savage. She didn't steel herself to be caressed by his words and actually developed this unexpected feeling for him. Unless his niceness was a sham. I'm being genuine here. Is it that strange for you that I can note your hesitation? Honey, listen to me. You might be a devil, a bloody fine one at that. But you're not an actress, and you don't need to. Actresses fake their actions. Why should you when you're not? As she stammered, gradually losing her confidence, inwardly, Lucifer grinned. Got you. It should be noted that he meant every word he said. It was all a part of his approach. No, he wouldn't touch her if she didn't want to. That wouldn't be a challenge. More satisfaction to be had if he could turn her opinion on him around, and so far, as proven by her reddening cheeks and her subtle fidgeting, it was working accordingly. You've been a welcoming host to this homeless man. Dare I ask more? He continued, tell me, who would invite someone they just met into their room? Unless, of course, there was a hidden intention. Or a one-night stand. But her case fell to the former. You should value yourself more than just surrendering yourself to the first random stunningly eye-catching man you encounter, princess. You're one in a million, as people would say, but I think you're better than that. No. I don't know. Rias muttered, her eyes widening as she had finally come to realize the actuality of her plan and its short-sightedness because of her growing desperation. I don't know. Trust me, you are. I happen to be a great judge of a character. A God-given ability, I suppose. He leaned back to the pillow, using his arms as support. So? Which side is yours, princess? Or am I meant to sleep on the floor? I don't mind. I like the carpet. Rias blinked, finally getting herself back after losing herself his gentle gaze. It's fine. I'll take this side. You can sleep there. Don't mind me if I do then. Lucifer hummed, and hummed a delighted groan as he contentedly slouched his head on a pillow that was heavenly soft. Oh dear, this bed's amazing. I won't mind being a princess. Oh dear. Maybe I should consider becoming one, actually. Unsure on what to do at this unforeseen turn of events, Rias stared at him, simply looking at him as Lucifer got all comfy, almost forgetting her scandalous body as the warmth of a very expensive bed embalmed him. H. He's adorable. A thought invaded her mind, slapping her cheek. And no, if this keeps up, her plan would fail. Realizing that, Rias upped her ante. Leaving the white bath towel on the floor, she crawled to her side of the bed, and lied there, facing him. She lied in a way that showed every inch of her assets, namely her breasts and her slender waistline. She took more than a peek at his body. He wasn't muscular or buff, but certainly an eye-turner without a doubt, and once again she failed to control her burning blush. But Lucifer was staring at the ceiling, arms behind his head, a contented smile on his face. Not even a glance. That was insulting to a lady who had exposed everything for him to see. Lucifer. She called, her voice a sultry whisper. Young and inexperienced as I may be, I am still a woman of my words. I've never invited a man to this room. And this will be a one-time offer. What if tomorrow comes? Playing your cards this soon? She saw a cheek tugging a corner of his lips as he rested his eyes, forming a grin as if he read her intention. My dear Rias. If tomorrow comes and you are still as desperate, I'm fairly certain you will try and tempt me again, princess." That statement froze every bone in her body as the pressure in the air changed. Suddenly feeling naked, she unconsciously lifted the blanket to cover herself. "I don't quite understand what you're saying?" Her shift in tone from seducing to suspecting told him that he was right, and he chuckled, marking his victory in this short battle of wits. "I've slept with women. Maidenly virgins without an exception. And do you know what these maidens, girls who valued their chastity, and a sucker for romance, have in common?" As his eyes flickered a splash of blue flames, Rias was unsure if she should be terrified, impressed, or confused. She settled with the first option, and tugged her blanket a little closer to her body. Lucifer gazed into her eyes, and Rias felt utterly helpless as her grip tightened. If not love, they desire something else that is worth giving up their once-in-a-lifetime clarity. Money, perhaps. Or to distract a broken heart. Or favor, among other things. Manipulation game. A game he was very fond of since his early days as a proud angel, so loved that he might love it as much as he loved himself. "So that brings me to the question," Lucifer continued, now lying on his side to face her directly, smiling still while Rias' composure had been wiped off. "What possibly could make a devil as gorgeous as you, a noble from a grand house, to be willing to surrender your virginity to me, a Lucifer who you don't see as the Lucifer, princess? He might love sex, and that should be a religion in itself, but Lucifer was not a walking raging hormone. He was not just handsome face, charming wits, lustful desires, and an unholy holy power to top it all off, but no brain. Lucifer was a being capable of coercing a third of all population of angels fully devoted to God to follow him in hell, and add in a couple thousands of heartless, savage, beastly demons to his rank. Lucifer was a being that could read all the deepest, darkest cravings in anyone's heart, devils or angels. This peculiar crimson-haired devil, for example, who was already dancing in his little fingers without realizing it. It was a dance between the devils, short and one-sided as it was. Cold sweats dripped down the frame of her face, and Rias' screamery was silenced completely. Wordlessly she listened and uncovered her plotting to its very last bit. Somehow, he could tell. Somehow, he read her like an open book. Somehow, he beat her in her own game she started. She was prideful, but tonight, she learned that pride wouldn't help her in desperate times. She braced herself, braving to face whatever the consequences, even if she was to die that night, on her bed, naked. At the very least, she wouldn't have to deal with that man anymore. Acknowledging her loss, she straightened her posture and allowed the blanket drop on her lap, then stared directly into his calculating dark eyes. "Earlier, you asked me why devils reincarnate other beings to turn them as devils. The answer is because of our low birth rate at 8. Rias began, primly. "Oh? So like Japan in general? Far worse. Devils was a species that had been in the brink of extinction until Satan Beelzebub invented the evil pieces. Yet even then, reincarnated devils are still treated as a lower stature, regardless of their class. Even if they're high class, they're still a reincarnated devil. It's not rare for a low class to be seen as mere slaves by most pure devils to this very day. They are just not the same. So in order to keep the purity of the devils, pure devils are often wedded to another. Consent be damned." Lucifer hummed, acknowledging her. "This was the bomb. My parents arranged one for myself, without letting me have any say. I'm not allowed to choose for myself or have control of my own fate." Rias frowned, anger seething in her. "My brother was the only person that I know can change my parents' mind, but I know he has more concerning matters to handle. And he's no longer a greenery either." She sounded honest, to him and herself. He supposed she realized There was no point in keeping her cards folded anymore now. Lucifer raised his brows as he worked his mind. Being a devil, he was rather in tune with sins. Lies most of all. And he didn't sense it. It could be the truth or it could be a lie that she believed to be the truth, but essentially, she wasn't lying. It appeared she wasn't as spoiled as he thought she would be. I've attempted to shut myself in. I've locked myself in my room, but I just can't abandon my responsibilities as a devil. I was given a territory to oversee. And granted, I worked very little to gain it, but I've always done my hardest to see it remain untouched. To keep it safe. Her eyes narrowed in spite. But because of all of this stupid marriage, I've lost a valuable asset and nearly another one too. Those crows. Crows? Lucifer guessed she was referring to those fallen angels. As for the assets, his best bet was Issei and that blondie back then. The way her face slowly changed to one of distress was not one easy to fake. Unless, of course, she was as talented in deception as him. But that was unlikely. She was a devil, but she was nowhere close to him in this game. To tell you the truth, I planned to reincarnate another person before Asia, but when he died, he just won't come back. Well, maybe because his soul returned to his original body. Lucifer hummed, somewhat sympathetically. An arranged marriage of an unwilling noble. How classic. You who are of noble blood may not follow the wishes of your heart, no. So, who's the lucky guy? He mused, but keeping it thoughtful so it didn't come across as a tease. She scowled. He hit a touchy subject, regardless of his intention. Someone I loathe. The only person that can make me lose my temper just from seeing his face alone. Yikes. Lucifer was glad he wasn't whoever this person was. But the anger in her voice faded as Rias sighed. I suppose you can say this is my last resort. I'm not trying to get your sympathy, but this is how it is for me. I'm truly at my wit's end. At last, she averted her eyes away, looking ashamed. I deeply apologize for trying to deceive you. If you're going to kill me, please have mercy and make it quick. Lucifer widened his eyes. Kill you? Have you gone mad? Why in the blithering hell would I do that? To her surprise again, he beamed an enthusiastic smile as he sat up. No, don't apologize, because that was brilliant. Devils should be devious exactly like you, princess. Although, try to be a little bit subtler next time. Boys are never men, but not all men remain boys, see. The shock was apparent in her face. What? Aren't you angry at me? For what? Getting undressed? Sharing your troubles? Lucifer gave her an odd look while he brushed another pink on her cheeks. I should be flattered. I am flattered. Rias was still in a state of utter disbelief, her mouth slightly agape. I don't know about you or these new satans, but being a devil is all about free will, isn't it? His grin pertained, inching closer to a suggesting smirk. If they've taken your right, then take it back. You choose your own fate. You decide which path to go. If you think that by sleeping with someone else preferably, you can solve your problem, why not give it a try? It's better than simply giving up and taking it in the ass, I'd say. Yes. I do think so. Her eyes widened, revealing more of her barrel irises. What he said made perfect sense to her. It was her life, why couldn't she be in control of it? Or did it make perfect sense, because that was what she wanted to hear? Lucifer smiled, finding her hopeful look to be rather adorable. Tell you what, I'm willing to participate in this little scheme of yours. But you know the rules, a favor calls for another favor. It's not a deal with the devil with nothing in return for the devil, princess. Then he slipped in a chuckle, a good-humored one. although, in this case, we both are devils. But I'm sure you understand. Rias nodded. I understand, she said, a bit hesitant. She crossed her arms below the swell of her breasts, slender fingers below her chin as if to look poised. To be clear, in exchange of your favor, I'll have two. Satisfy me, he ended, striking a mischievous lopsided smile that in a way suggested that she would not regret this. Satisfy me, and I'll see to it that you won't have to marry whoever this person is. Despite it being similar to handing her life to another thread, and he might just be scamming her to get laid, this seemed to be the best option she had. Regardless of what he had done, they weren't enough to serve as definite evidence that he truly was Lucifer, strong as he was. Maybe not yet comparable to the strength of her brother, but perhaps he would be cunning enough to get her away from this mess. Perhaps he really was her only hope. But how did he know she was a virgin? Was her act that bad? After mulling long enough to make Lucifer glance around the room while waiting for her response, Rias crept towards him, earning his smile. The heiress gingerly saddled her legs around his waist, hands nervously locked around his broad shoulders as he positioned himself between her fine legs, his arms reaching to her back. Lucifer's smile grew at feeling her supple, softer and smooth body, appreciating the warmth of a woman he had longed to feel again. I'll hold you on to your words. I tell no lies, princess, he whispered as he laid a lingering gaze at her lips, then to her eyes. You better hold on to me as well. Rias swallowed as she stared, his chest concealed behind the unbuttoned shirt. It seemed she really had to abandon her dream of giving her first to someone she loved. She didn't think it would be this unnerving, but she didn't want to turn back now. Her pride wouldn't allow it, and her pride had been pummeled enough that any more than she'd break. Your skin's as smooth as I'd imagined, Lucifer quipped, intending to ease her down as he kept his eyes on her eyes, not her body. At least for the moment. It's all right. I'll take good care of you. Promise I won't bite too hard. Despite the humor, Lucifer's voice was warm and soothing, and somehow sweet. Sort of like honey. She admitted he was alluring. Remarkably handsome, but not the pretty, almost naive kind like her knight. No. Lucifer was masculine, the kind that women would fall over heels for, and some schoolgirls if he was their type. She was unsure if it was due to his mysterious powers or just her lack of experience, but she felt her body heating up the moment he ran a hand over her back, all the way to the nape of her neck and her hair. Constantly she found herself wondering as he embraced her, comforting her in a way no one had ever done to her before. Was a man's touch always been this gentle? His minty breath became more pronounced the closer he got to her. Ever kissed before? Her nervousness muted her, and could only shake her head as an answer. Why? What a coincidence. I happen to know a thing or two. I'd be more than glad to be a tutor. Rias looked up at his russet eyes, and down to his nose and then his lips that was playing a smile, and she realized that he was fairly handsome. So he was a little bit older than her, but so was her father to her mother. Age mattered little for devils, beings that could live for more than 1,000 years. She was 18 too. Closing her eyes, the heiress yielded to the devil. Lucifer inclined his head in an angle, peeking through a small slit of an eyelid, and waited for their lips to touch. Before she started to hesitate, his arms were around her, holding her sure and firm as he bent her head back and kissed her. Tight-lipped, softly, and at first, innocent. He allowed her to grow accustomed to the feeling of his lips, for her nerve to settle, for her body to loosen. He let her take her time, as did he in savoring her. Her lips were soft, plump. The bottom lip was mushier and thicker, and he couldn't wait to run his tongue along these velvety rims of hers, just wanting to fulfill his needs without regards, but he held back. All just for this crimson-haired devil to regain her lost confidence. Lucifer had a soft spot for damsels in distress, apparently. But the moment she started to reopen her eyes to show him she was unafraid, restating her place as equal to him, he would unbind all restraints. And Rias did. She felt confident as she was the one who did all the kissing, until Lucifer slipped out his tongue and licked the seam of her lips. This caused her to shoot her eyes open in surprise, and gasped a little, which was a beginner's mistake due to the awkwardness it often caused, but Lucifer was unfettered. Instead, he kept on kissing her, harder yet tenderly until Rias closed her eyes again, letting him take the lead. Gently, he massaged her lips between his, nipping her ever so lightly, sucking in every breath she leaked. Eventually, he pried them open, slipping his tongue between her warm lips. Rias knotted her fists in his shirt as he ventured the insides of her mouth. He was gentle but demanding, and obviously far more experienced than her. She felt ticklish when he touched the top of her mouth, yet when he twisted her tongue and probably bruised it, Rias began to feel the pulsating heat again. She felt hot. The place below her stomach was tingling painfully, and she felt as if she was melting. Her body was burning. Her hands had been unconsciously feeling his shoulders, the muscles of his broad back, gripping a tuft of his hair as her body thawed into his. Like hormones that slipped out, her sweats had now begun staining his dress shirt. Gently, he pushed her, not breaking the kiss as she fell down without protest. She couldn't feel the weight of his body or the small stubbles on his chin or the bedsheets behind her back. She was numb to everything but him and his lips, and she wanted him nowhere but closer to her. Make her drunk by him. He was the one to withdraw his lips, leaving Rias with a feeling of sad emptiness as she sucked in a breath. Her breasts seemingly swelled up at each breath she took in. Before directing his attention to her body, Lucifer planted a tiny kiss on her chin, and then tucked his head between the crook of her neck and her smooth shoulder, and nipped on her neck. Yet another moan escaped her, this time louder. Ah! Lucifer! As he cycled her skin greedily, her hands strangely reached up to the bedspread above. She gripped them tightly as he then planted several more at the valley of her chest, and then the planes of her stomach as his hands massaged her breasts. He left multiple bluish spots before he went further down. Bruises, yet they didn't hurt. She could see and feel her pink buds hardening between his fingers, and her legs wouldn't stop fidgeting over the building sensation in her loins. It was foreign, unfamiliar, but she wanted more. She had stopped caring, as announced by her moaning. As her sweet, sweet voice filled the room like her fragrance, the intoxicating pheromones she unknowingly excreted, which continued on escalating and loudening after each deft movement he made over her body as if he knew the right places to touch and the right pressure. Rias shuddered. A hand left her breast, and then all of a sudden, she threw her head back as her body arched upwards as his fingers entered her core. Her first orgasm rocked her body like an avalanche, and Rias stared at the ceiling as her mouth was agape from the surprise. Rias struggled to catch her breath, heaving loudly and hotly as she fell flat to the bed. He might as well be seeing fumes coming out from her lips and her lower lips. She felt every touch, and she came just from him inserting a finger. Her body was easily subjected to pleasure, a trait he always liked and enjoyed should a girl or a woman carry it. What? Looking for him, she glanced down, past her rosy, bruised chest. She saw Lucifer had stopped, and placed by his lips were his middle and index fingers, now coated in her milky fluids. If possible, Her face flushed furiously and as red as her hair when she saw him licking the sticky fluids from his fingers. That's dirty. Rias didn't know where to look, so she settled for the ceiling. For about 3 seconds before, curiosity got the best out of her. If this is dirty, then this'll bring a whole new meaning to getting my hands dirty. Looking at the girl before him blushing and sweating all over, Lucifer once again pitied those chaste angels missing out such a delightful sight. "Congratulations, love, you just came." She said nothing. She was already embarrassed, but him announcing it doubled the embarrassment. Oddly enough, she felt exhausted as if she had run an entire marathon. Her chest was heaving up and down, her breath breaking, husky and hot. And she didn't even have sex with him yet. She shivered violently as Lucifer toyed her clit with his thumb, and Rias felt on edge just as he inserted 2 fingers in her. He rubbed her inner walls, gently, pressing his fingers against it as he searched for the magical spot, letting the pleasure within her to build slowly, and most of all, tantalizingly, that it left her wanting for more. It was a slow, steady process that was painful for her, all because he wanted to hear her beg. Rias mewed, moving her hips along with the rhythm of his fingering without thinking. Her face was scarlet red at this point, and no vanity left in her eyes. She looked at him in pain, a sight pleasing for his eyes. "Please. Faster." He flashed a smile, appreciating her submission. His palms traveled her sides, feeling the curves of her waist unhurriedly. It was her that led his hand back to her breast, begging him to massage her like before. Yet he didn't. If he was punishing her for her attempt of manipulation, this was the most horrible form of torture. "Please." Tears began to well as she played with her own breasts, her eyes glazing as she slurred. "Lucifer. Lucifer-sama." That suffix made him raise his brow, but didn't stop his act. Somebody enjoyed being compliant, as it turned out to be. An interesting turn of events, despite her stature as an heiress. Her lips were parted, her soft tongue laying out, panting heavily as she stared at him with a carnal need, overwhelmed by lust. Any sane and straight man would have ravaged her with that yearning look, and the morning star would be no exception had he wasn't enjoying her plea a little too much. He didn't want it to just end like that. Always had been his guilty pleasure to tame a prideful woman. "I like you, princess," he muttered, keeping his fingers moving as he flashed his grin. "I'm certain I'll be enjoying our little pact." His words came to her like wind, she heard none. Rias' heaved breaths continued to fill the otherwise silent room. She was wet, her body drenched by sweat and her thighs by her juice. The bed had been soaked by a mixture of both. The sensation was rising slowly, and it was nearing the peak, yet before it did, as she contracted and squeezed his fingers, Lucifer drew them out. "No!" Rias cried. She genuinely felt she would cry. Though her brain was all puddle after all that, she didn't want to lose the pleasure, and she could feel it gradually seeping away from her body. She panicked. "Why did you stop? I'm already satisfied just by seeing you." Lucifer smiled innocently. As her eyes widened in shock and horrified realization, he sat back down and scooted away from her legs that were unclosed, licking the transparent juices trailing down his hand. "What's left to be done is my part of the bargain. I'll take care of your forced marriage, princess. Don't worry." But he cut her off, shooting a side glance. "I didn't specify anything about having to satisfy you, did I not? I have ways to foil your marriage without having to take your virginity, meaning if she wished to go further, it would be all on her." Lucifer grinned inwardly as Rias stared emptily, thinking hard with the little remaining sanity she had. It was clear to him she wanted him badly and desperately. so badly that it became a need for her. You can't do this to me. Ah. Hang on. You can't do this to me. I'm a Greemery. Not your plaything on. Seeing Rias starting to play with her own body in desperation, inserting her own fingers and replicating his movements without success, his grin resurfaced. Or do you suppose you'd like to extend our little dance? He suggested, lacing his words to make her feel as though she was in control of her decision, when she clearly had lost it the moment she made the deal. Your body, in exchange of pleasures only I can give? She didn't waste a single second, and her fingers were pressed between her wet folds, still trying to elicit the same pleasure he gave her without any luck. Please. She begged him in a look of misery and helplessness. Lust was the only thing in her mind, and tears were dropping from her eyes, but it was by no means a tear of sorrow. That was how miserable she became. And thus, another pact was made. Thus, the devil obtained